Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with the latest developments in Donald Trump's legal battles. The former president has followed through on posting a $175 million bond in his New York civil fraud case. That means he will avoid having his assets seized while he appeals the $454 million judgment against him. That bond was arranged by California-based Knight Specialty Insurance, a company best known for subprime auto loans, which is run by billionaire Trump supporter Don Hankey. Meanwhile, the former president is coming under new restrictions ahead of his hush money trial in New York. The judge in that case has expanded a gag order after Trump attacked both him and his daughter on social media. Lori Levinson is a former federal prosecutor, now a professor at Loyola Law School.
Whether he wants to or not, Donald Trump has to tone it down. Because by attacking the judge's daughter, by attacking members of the district attorney's office, Trump has made it increasingly difficult for the judge to hold a fair trial.
Loyola Law professor Lori Levinson says the expanded gag order still allows Trump to make comments about Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. The hush money trial begins April 15th.
Well, Nathan, we have another note on Donald Trump. His net worth on paper tumbled $1 billion as shares of his social media business plunged. We get details from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
That was after the company disclosed that it lost more than $58 million in 2023 as revenue for the former president's Truth Social platform trickled in. Trump Media and Technology Group stock fell 21% to $48.66 a share. That's below the $49.95 level where the blank check vehicle it merged with was trading a week ago. According to filings with the SEC, Trump owns 57% of the company, with his stake now worth $3.76 billion on paper. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Charlie, thanks. And checking shares of Trump Media and Technology Group this morning, they're down another 4.3%.
And now to the latest developments in the Middle East, Karen. A shadow war between Israel and Iran has ebbed and flowed in recent years, but a reported airstrike in Syria may be ratcheting up tensions. Details from Bloomberg's Amy Morris in Washington.
Iranian and Syrian state media claim an Israeli airstrike on Iran's embassy compound in Syria killed a number of people, including a top military commander, Mohammad Reza Zahedi, a high-ranking Iranian general linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, plus another general and at least 5 officers. Iran's foreign minister says Israel should be held accountable for the repercussions of the attack. The country's envoy to Syria vowed a, quote, decisive response. Israeli officials did not confirm the strike. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thank you. Meanwhile, the White House is calling for an investigation into an Israeli airstrike in Gaza that caught a well-known aid organization in the crossfire. The Washington-based World Central Kitchen says 7 of its staff were killed in the attack, including an American with dual Canadian citizenship. The group, founded by celebrity chef Jose Andres, delivered the first shipment of aid by sea into northern Gaza last month. It's helped oversee construction of a pier to bring more meals into the region. The Israeli military says it's conducting a review of the incident at the highest levels.
Let's turn now to the economy, Karen. The odds of a rate cut in June are deteriorating, and we get the details from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Nathan, traders recalibrating their bets on the Federal Reserve's easing, briefly setting the odds of a first move in June below 50%. This comes as ISM manufacturing was stronger than expected. Torsten Slok is chief economist at Apollo Management.
We have suddenly an expansion for the first time since 2022. We also seen how suddenly that prices paid in ISM also beginning to accelerate.
Well, the number of Fed rate cuts priced into swaps contracts for this year dropped to fewer than 65 basis points. That's less than Fed policymakers themselves have forecast. Some market watchers say the pendulum of sentiment in U.S. rates may be shifting toward the hawkish direction. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Well, the strong factory data helped send both stocks and bonds lower on the first day of the second quarter. RBC Capital Markets head of U.S. equity strategy Lori Calvasina expects to see money moving to other parts of the markets besides the so-called Magnificent Seven stocks.
I think we're due for one big catch-up trade in the market from, kind of everything outside of the Mag 7, whether it's small cap, whether it's, kind of the non-tech sectors. If you look at the PE in the market X the Mag 7, it's trading around 16 times. The Mag 7's been trading between 27 and 28 times on a forward PE, and kind of around past peaks. So I think there's room for the rest of the market to kind of catch up. I'm not saying we have to get quite that overvalued, but there's room for the rest of the market to make a move.
Capital Markets' Lori Calvasina boosted her year-end S&P 500 price target to 5,300.
And in Europe, Karen, UBS is updating its investors on when it'll begin its stock buyback program. Let's go to London and get the details from Bloomberg's Ewan Potts. Ewan.
Nathan and Karen, the bank buyback story rolls on. UBS says it will purchase up to $2 billion of its shares over the next 2 years, including $1 billion this year. The announcement gives shareholders in Switzerland's biggest bank greater visibility on returns as it completes the integration of Credit Suisse. UBS saying its ambition is for share buybacks to exceed pre-acquisition levels by 2026. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ewan, thanks. Well, we're keeping our eye on Tesla shares. Later today, the company is expected to report global first quarter delivery and production numbers. Analysts say demand for electric vehicles and elevated interest rates are taking a toll on sales. We get more from Bloomberg technology host Ed Ludlow.
So Tesla's quarterly deliveries have Wall Street worried. Brace, because the first quarter numbers are coming. The expectation, 457,000 odd, sequential decline. But the key thing, does Tesla beat its performance from the same period a year ago? Higher rates, government policy, a tepid consumer, and Elon with a new policy that might have upset some people in the sprint finish to the first quarter. Ed Ludlow, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. And one other corporate note this morning: with more than half of the votes cast, the Wall Street Journal is reporting Disney has pulled ahead in its proxy battle against Nelson Peltz's Trian Partners. The paper says BlackRock and T. Rowe Price are among the major investors backing Disney. The Journal says investors are still casting votes and can change them through the annual meeting tomorrow.
All right, Nathan, thanks, and welcome back. It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The owner of the ship that rammed into a bridge in Baltimore last week, killing 6 workers, is seeking to limit its liability to about $43.7 million. Legal experts say the company, Grace Ocean, could face hundreds of millions of dollars in damage claims. Yesterday, it filed a petition jointly with Synergy Marine, which was operating the Singapore-flagged cargo ship Dali. They claim the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge was not due to any fault, neglect, or want of care of the companies, and that they shouldn't be held liable for any loss or damage from the disaster. Meanwhile, Maryland officials, including Governor Wes Moore, urge patience as the cleanup gets underway, saying the safety of the rescuers and salvage crew will be top priority during the precarious operation.
And my directive is to complete this mission with no injuries and no casualties. We've already lost 6 Marylanders to this crisis. I refuse to lose any more.
Governor Moore says a temporary channel on the northeast side of the collapse opened yesterday and will help to get more vessels around the site of the collapse. In 2 rulings, Florida Supreme Court decided that the state's 15-week abortion ban is constitutional, which paves the way for a 6-week ban to take effect soon. The state Supreme Court also ruled voters in Florida will be heading to the polls later this year to decide what is the future of abortion in the state. Critics say that the wording in the November measure is too vague.
It doesn't define what viability is. It doesn't define what a healthcare worker is.
However, supporters of the ballot measure, like Anna Hochhammer with the Florida Women's Freedom Coalition, disagrees with critics.
Floridians are smart. They understand what we want. They understand what the language says.
The November ballot would allow Florida voters to decide whether they think that abortion should be protected in the state's constitution and government interference should be limited. It's already been decided between Joe Biden, and former President Donald Trump, but it's primary day in New York, Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, and Wisconsin. Mississippi is holding a Republican runoff election to see who will challenge 16-term Democratic incumbent Benny Thompson. Mosques in New York City are struggling to house and feed migrants as the country's latest immigration surge becomes increasingly more African and Muslim. Leaders of a a mosque in Harlem say their congregation is spending hundreds of dollars a night to host iftar, the traditional end of fasting during Ramadan. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update with John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The long-range shooting and the playmaking ability of Caitlin Clark has grabbed the attention of the nation in her Iowa career. Not over yet. Clark scored 41 points with 9 threes. She had 12 assists. Iowa beat LSU 94-87, avenging their loss to the Tigers in last year's championship game. Now heading to the women's Final Four in Cleveland, where on Friday, Iowa will take on UConn. The Huskies have a star of their own. Paige Beckers, in an 80-73 win over USC, had 28 points. This will be UConn's 23rd Final Four. They've gone to 15 of the last 16. Both UConn and NC State have their men's and women's teams heading to the Final Four. The Yankees are 5-0. Last time that happened was 1992, which was actually the last Yankee team to finish under 500. Yanks won 5-2 at Arizona. Luis Gil in the rotation due to the Garrett Cole injury. Pitched into the fifth inning, allowed only one hit. The Mets are 0-4 at Citi Field. They got great pitching for 9 innings, then lost to Detroit 5-0 in 10. Meanwhile, in Houston.
2-2 to Guerrero. Ground ball tap. Blanco lets it go by. Dubon fields. Throws the first. In time. Oh, no! Header! Ronel Blanco! Yainer Diaz, the first to jump into his arms. And the rest of his teammates come out to mob him.
On KBMB, just the 8th big league star for Ronel Blanco, and he threw the 17th no-hitter in Astros history. At the Garden, Rangers lost to Pittsburgh 5-2, ending a 5-game win streak, just the Rangers' second loss the past month. Islanders in Philadelphia gave up the tying goal with 10 seconds left, but won 4-3 on a Brock Nelson goal in overtime, his 30th. Nets lost in Indiana 123-111. Pacers scored 43 in the first quarter. The Celtics' 59th win, 118-114 at Charlotte. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen, Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. And futures now, little changed. S&P and NASDAQ futures anyway. Dow futures down 0.3%. The 10-year Treasury yield 4.31%. And NYMEX crude oil up 1.6% at $85.07 a barrel.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. Let's get a little bit more on what's happening in this market. The slight pullback in futures and the surge that we're seeing in commodities this morning, with bond traders pushing back their bets on a first rate cut move from the Federal Reserve following a gauge of manufacturing activity in the U.S. moving into expansion territory for the first time in nearly a year and a half. For more on this, we're joined by Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta. So, Kriti, we have seen so much data over the last several months showing continued strength in this economy. Now this surprise ISM manufacturing data showing expansion for the first time since September of 2022 really does seem to be feeding into this narrative that the Fed really doesn't need to be in a rush to cut rates.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because for so long, that's what exactly the markets are banking upon. And it's been the story of consumer resilience, as you've pointed out. But Nathan, you know as well as anybody that not all inflation is created equal. And I think what was so striking about this ISM data in particular is that off the back of it, you saw anywhere from 10 to 14 basis points of moves in the Treasury market across the curve off of just an ISM report. And the reason I kind of put emphasis on that is because you traditionally don't see that kind of reaction and sustained reaction throughout the trading day off of just one report, and especially the ISM of all places, specifically because manufacturing makes up only a fraction of the U.S. economy relative to the services data. So you see more sustained moves off services data rather than manufacturing. So this was interesting, but it comes in tandem with, as you say, this building narrative, CPI, PPI, the PCE numbers, the labor numbers as well. And I think what's important about the ISM data and the way it's actually calculated is that it is more sensitive to factory outputs, to new orders, to wage stories, especially in parts of America that have more of an industrial focus on that as well. All of that are things that are in line with that get factored into the PPI numbers and the PCE deflator numbers, essentially the pieces of data that the Fed pays more attention to than just the headline CPI. And that's kind of the building blocks that are taking place at the moment when factoring in this data.
It was interesting, though, wasn't it, to see this data come out, this surprise on the manufacturing side when we did get that PCE data on Friday that we heard from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell saying that it came in basically in line with their expectations, even with goods inflation in that PCE data showing a little bit more stickiness this time around.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern here, right? And you heard that with Chair Powell in some of his commentary there. He said that even though the PCE numbers came in, on par, he issued a lot of caution. He said we have to be careful about the rate cut story, as if it's a surprise that they wouldn't be careful. But they really risk this kind of spiral that if you go with one cut, how many more cuts follow? You can't have just one move and then not touch anything. It's kind of the start of a longer program, or at least that's the expectation of economists and markets. And that's that first move that they want to get right. The goods piece of it is really important because in 2021, we're kind of going through our inflation saga over the last couple of years. Post-COVID, post-pandemic, the reopening trade, so much of the supply chain hiccups, et cetera, were cost-driven. It was commodity prices, oil prices hitting $100 a barrel and more. It was the grain story coming out of Ukraine and the war there. It was gold prices and raw materials becoming more expensive with this move in EVs and chips. Basically, the big take was this was commodity-driven inflation that ended up in shortages around the world and therefore supply chain snags. The inflation story right now is services-driven. It's wages-driven. Everybody wants a little bit more money in their paycheck in line with the inflationary pressures that they've been dealing with prices that have been and costs that have been passed on to the consumer by major corporations around the world. The concern around a reacceleration is more goods-driven and commodity-driven this time around, and that's arguably, to your point, more sticky and therefore more dangerous.
All right, Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta with a look at some of the latest economic data. Kriti, thank you. This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, Sirius XM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.